talk when you want. Okay. It is finished 7 times. Now, in our study today, we will see that the word finish marks 7 successive events. Successive means one after the other. This event took place, next event, and the event after that, right? In the history of the world, from creation to new creation, right? Now, each use of the word finish is closely related to the sanctuary services, right? So each word finished, we will see the event, and that event is closely related to the sanctuary services, right? In some place of the sanctuary. Then each appearance of the word finished is related to the Sabbath. So one is, it is finished is closely related to the sanctuary. 2, it is finished is related to the 7th-day Sabbath, right? So let's get into our study. Right. Now, first of all, we need to look at some context. We need to know what, where, why, how, right? The context for our study begins with an event that took place in the most holy place in the heavenly sanctuary, not on earth, in the heavenly sanctuary, before creation began, before this world was created. There, according to Ezekiel 28:14, Lucifer was a covering cherub. Covering cherub means he stood next to God himself. And he was in the inner sanctum, means he was close to God, right? But God does, he was close there. So he was one of the 4 most important angels. Now, Lucifer was beautiful, he was wise, he was rich, he was popular, and the corruption of these qualities led to his downfall. There was one straw that broke the camel's back, and that was God's plan of creation for this world. Now, let's read from Mrs. White in the book Early Writings, page 145, what God showed her about Lucifer in heaven.
Satan was once an honored angel in heaven next to Christ. His countenance, like those of the other angels, was mild and expressive of happiness. His forehead was high and broad, showing great intelligence. His form was perfect, his bearing noble and majestic. But when God said to his Son, "Let us make man in our image," Satan was jealous of Jesus. He wished to be consulted concerning the formation of man. And because he was not, he was filled with envy, jealousy, and hatred. He desired to receive the highest honors in heaven next to God.
Okay. Now, and by the way, for no reason at all, now we can't give a reason why this perfect being decided to exercise his freedom of choice to choose evil. We don't know that, right? The origin of sin is a mystery known only to God. We don't know, right? So the sin of the universe, the sin that we have in our universe, originated in the most holy place where God himself was, in heaven. Because Lucifer was a covering cherub next to the ark of God, next to God's throne, right? So that's where sin began. We don't know how it came in. It's a mystery to us. Only God knows that. That is where sin came into the heart of Lucifer. He chose to let it happen. Now, let's talk about the first, it is finished, and this took place at creation. Now, in spite of the fact that Lucifer rebelled against God and was jealous of Jesus, God could have chosen to abort, to do away with the plan of creating man. But he didn't. He decided to go forward with the plan of creating this world and creating man on it. Now, let's read Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2 for the condition of the earth, right? We have now already studied this in our previous study. But so that we can get context, let's read that.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters.
Now we had noticed this, that the condition of the earth before the week of creation was chaotic. There's nothing planned, right? And before creation week, the world was empty. There was nothing. Without form and void means there was nothing. There was nothing in the earth, right? It was in disorder, darkness, and lifeless. So there was no light, there was no life, there was no order, and there was no void. There was nothing, right? So God, he had to resolve these issues. Okay. Now we need to know, we are going to read Genesis 1:31, that it was Jesus who worked during the creation week and not man. Man was not there. Jesus is the one who worked. So let's read Genesis 1:31.
Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day.
Now, as we noticed in our previous studies in this series, Jesus decided to work for 6 days to create everything in this world. He even created the matter, the very things that he made things out, he created, right? So we need to underline that Jesus worked 6 days. Okay? It was Jesus who worked. Man did not work. Jesus did all the work, right? That's what we find in Genesis 1:31. Now, Jesus finished his work on the 6th day. How do we know that Jesus finished his work on the 6th day? Let's read Genesis chapter 2, verse 1.
Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished.
Okay. Now that's a key word. Finished is a key word, right? It is done is a key word in this study. So wherever you see that, pay attention. So what is the first use of this word finished? It's after Jesus concluded his work on creation week. And then what did Jesus do? He worked 6. He finished his work on the 6th. And on the 7th day, he rested or he ceased to work. He stopped his work, right? So our next point is Jesus rested on the 7th day from whose work? From his work. So let's read Genesis chapter 2, verse 2 to see whether the Bible says that.
And on the 7th day, God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had done.
And he
had done.
And he rested on the 7th day. Can't you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had done. Okay. So somehow the impression that we get is that all the work was done by who? Who did all the work? Jesus, right? And that he was the one who rested. Because he's the one who worked, he's the one who rested. That's clear from the Bible. Now, did you notice the number of times on the 7th day God ended his work, which he had done? He rested from all his work, which he had done. Now, who did the work, all this work? Clearly, Jesus. And who rested? Jesus. Okay, is that clear? Right, now let's move on. Right. Now let's read about what Jesus did when he finished his 6 days of work. Jesus did something. We're going to read from Patriarchs and Prophets, page 47, and let's see what Spirit of Prophecy has to say about on this.
God looked with satisfaction upon the work of his hands. All was perfect, worthy of its divine author, and he rested not as one weary, but as well pleased with the fruits of his wisdom and goodness and the manifestations of his glory.
What did Jesus do on the 7th day? He admired his work. He looked with satisfaction on his work. So in other words, he had ceased or stopped working and he enjoyed the works that he had done, if you please. Then what did Jesus do? Now, Jesus invited Adam and Eve to enjoy of this rest of it. He wanted Adam and Eve also to enjoy the work of creation, right? So when did God rest by himself? Did Jesus rest by himself? No, he invited Adam and Eve to rest with him. Now, how do we know that? Let's read Mark chapter 2, verse 27.
And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath.
Okay. Now, it was not their rest, because had they worked, they had not worked. Adam was created at the end of the sixth day, right? So Adam didn't work. Adam was just coming out of out of his creator's hand. He hadn't worked, right? So God invites Adam and Eve to rest with him, to enjoy the works of his hand. And that's what we find in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 48. God saw that the Sabbath day was essential for man, even in paradise before sin came. It was very essential. Let's see what Mrs. White says in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 48.
God saw that the Sabbath was essential for man, even in paradise. He needed to lay aside his own interests and pursuits for one day of the seven, that he might more fully contemplate the works of God and meditate upon his power and goodness. He needed a Sabbath to remind him more vividly of God and to awaken gratitude, because all that he enjoyed and possessed came from the beneficent hand of the Creator.
Okay. So now when Jesus rested on the seventh day, were Adam and Eve working on the seventh day while Jesus rested? No. They entered into his rest. So you see, Jesus would rest because he worked, but Adam and Eve had not worked, so they could not rest. From what? They entered into God's rest and they enjoyed what Jesus had done, not what they had done. So everything in creation was not what Adam and Eve or man had done. It was all what Jesus had done. And they rested on the seventh day to enjoy it with Jesus, what Jesus had done, not what they had done, right? Remember that point. Now moving on. Now, God makes the day holy, and then he invites us to enter his rest each week. So something that Jesus did that, anybody can't tell you that it's a different week. It has to be the seventh day because of what Jesus did on that day, right? So if anyone tells you first day Sabbath or Wednesday Sabbath, it can't be a Sabbath because of what Jesus did. So what did Jesus do? So Jesus then makes the Sabbath holy. Now, how does he make the day holy? How does the day become holy? Listen carefully. The day passes, he has rested. So in the beginning of that Sabbath day, when the sun went down, they would have had vespers with Jesus. He would have talked to them, and then they would have slept in the night. And then they got up and they spent time with Jesus. He would have talked to them. He would have shown them things, right? And so the Sabbath day passed. And what was Jesus doing? Jesus was resting and relishing, enjoying the work he had done. Now, like I said, Adam and Eve had not worked. They did not work that day. They ceased and they rested with Jesus. They were resting with Jesus. And then when the day ended, when the sun went down on that first Sabbath day of this world, then Jesus made it holy. So during the day, from that sunset of Friday to till the sunset of Saturday, the day wasn't holy. The fact that Jesus rested only at the end of that 7-day Sabbath, that Jesus made it holy. So the day became holy after Christ rested. Adam and Eve rested with him. He made the day holy and invited man, Adam and Eve and their descendants, you and me, to rest from that time forward with him weekly to commemorate his work and his rest. So he made the Sabbath day after resting, He made it and then he gave it to Adam and Eve and their descendants, who are you and me, to keep the Sabbath day so that we can enter into it now by faith, but we are going to see when we get to heaven in reality, so we can rest with him, enjoy his creation, acknowledge him as our creator God, and rest in him. Now notice Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11, which is the Sabbath command. Let's read that and see.
Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work. You, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it.
Now, why does God say, tell us, mankind, Adam and Eve from then onwards, work 6 and rest the seventh? Now, here's the explanation. It's found in the Bible. If you look at verse 11, that is up there. When did Jesus bless, hallow, or sanctify the holy Sabbath? Was it when the seventh day began, that is on Friday sunset? Or was it when the seventh day ended at sunset on the seventh day? It was when the seventh day ended. So the Sabbath became holy only when it ended, because during that whole 24-hour period, God was resting, and it was God's rest that made the day holy. So after Jesus rested the whole 24 hours, the whole day, he says, now this day is holy. This day is set apart. This day is mine for you to spend time with me. And so what does Jesus do? He has just created the week because he worked 6 and he ceased or rested on the 7th. And that completed a full week, a full week. 6 days are work, 7th day to rest. So then he takes the week that he has just created and he gives it to Adam and Eve. Now question, then do Adam and Eve do the same thing the second week that God did on the first? So he made the week and then he gives it to Adam and Eve. So do Adam and Eve do the same thing that God did on his first week? Work 6 and rest on the 7th. Yes. They work 6 and then the rest the following 7th day. Right? So the 4th commandment, the Sabbath commandment that you and I know, applies to Adam and Eve beginning with the second week of human creation. Right? Now, Adam and Eve were created on the end of the 6th day. So this week would be their full week, because that was half day and full day Sabbath there. It was 1.5, one day, and I don't know how many hours they were left on the 6th day since they were created. But they had a full week when God gave it to them at the end of that Sabbath day, the first Sabbath day. So the first Sabbath does not apply to Adam and Eve. God does not say to them, rest on the Sabbath. And the reason is very simple, because they hadn't worked. How can they rest if they hadn't worked? Right? They couldn't rest from their work. They hadn't done any work. Only Jesus could rest because he had worked for 6 days in creating the heavens and the earth. So then after Jesus worked 6, rested the 7th, then he takes this week that he has created and he gives it to Adam and Eve. And he says, okay, now this week is for you. Like everything else I made, this week is for you. And now you are going to work day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. And the next Sabbath, you are going to do what you saw me do this Sabbath. Okay? So the 4th commandment, once again, applies to Adam and Eve, beginning the second week of this earth history, because they could rest, because the second week was the week that they had worked 6 days. Is that clear? So we can rest only if we had worked. Adam and Eve on the first week was not their week, it was God's week, right? Jesus was the one who was creating. The next week, Jesus makes this week and he says, Adam and Eve, now you rest. Now, we read this statement from Patriarchs and Prophets, page 111. Why they are supposed to rest on the seventh day, right? It says, the first 6 days of each week are given to man for labor. Because, why? Because God employed the same period of the first week of this earth's first week in the work of creation. On the seventh day, man is to refrain from labor in commemoration, to commemorate, to acknowledge, right, of the Creator's rest. So when we keep Sabbath, whose rest are we commemorating? Whose rest, whose memorial is it? What are we doing there? We are commemorating his rest. The Sabbath is not about our rest, right? It's about entering God's rest. The Sabbath is God's. That's why Mark says the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is God's. God created the first week with the Sabbath, and then he gave it to Adam and said, now this is your week. Do what I have done in it. Okay? Now, Satan hates the Sabbath. Why do you think Satan hates the Sabbath? He hates it because it reminds us that Christ is the creator. Does Satan love the Sabbath? He just does not like the Sabbath because it reminds the world of his arch enemy. And who is he jealous of? He's jealous of Jesus. So when you and I keep the Sabbath, we are commemorating what Jesus did for us. And that he doesn't like. So he hates the Sabbath because in keeping it holy, we glorify Jesus as the creator and not him. This explains Satan's hatred of the Sabbath throughout this world's history. Now, you want to know much of, do you want to know how much Satan hates the Sabbath? Notice this list that I put up there of the ways that he tried to demean, belittle the Sabbath because it reminds us of Jesus every week that we keep it, every week that passes. And when we rest on the seventh day, we are giving glory. We are glorifying the Creator, Jesus Christ. And we are exalting Jesus Christ. And Satan hates Jesus. So he cannot abide by that. He doesn't want. He doesn't like it. So he's got to do something about that. And he's got to get rid of the sign or the reminder of Jesus in this world, in creation. And that is why he institutes Sunday, because Sunday brings glory to him. Now, how does Satan show his disgust for the Sabbath? Let's look at the ways he does. One is, in paganism, worship of the sun on the venerable day of the sun, that is Sunday. In the promotion of the theory of evolution. Now, how does he do that? Is Sabbath demeaned in the promotion of the theory of evolution? When you talk about it as a promote. The Sabbath is obliterated. It is not there when you talk about evolution, the theory of evolution. Why? Because if the world came into existence by evolution, like they say, there is no such thing as a 7-day week where God worked 6 and rested on the 7th. Because according to evolution, over millions and millions of years, this happened and that happened and that happened, and that's how the world came. So there is no such thing as a 6-day work week and 7-day Sabbath. So virtually the whole world believes in this. They are bought into this evolution theory. Then we find that Satan hates the Sabbath. He brings disrepute to the Sabbath by influencing the Jews of Christ's day to make it burdensome. Burdensome means they put in so much of tradition into it that the Sabbath became such a burden. So in the Christian world today, they see the Sabbath, the 7-day Sabbath, as a burden. Why? Because they are looking at it in the way that the religious leaders in Christ, they looked at it, right? You couldn't light a fire, you couldn't walk more than a mile, and all those things that were not in the Bible, they brought it into the Sabbath. And so the rest of the Christian world thinks that Sabbath is a It's terrible. It is so burdensome, right? That is what Satan did, right? Because Sabbath is not that in the Bible. Then in pushing Sunday higher and higher, and the Sabbath, seventh-day Sabbath lower and lower in the early Christian church. Then he did by influencing the papacy to replace Sabbath with Sunday, right? He's doing all of this to bring disrepute because he hates Jesus. And then he leads the papacy to think that it could change God's law by saying that Sunday is the day that we are supposed to. They think that they can do it, but they can't, right? By Protestantism embracing Sunday worship from the papacy. And he has convinced Protestantism that that is the true day of worship. Okay? And by the final death decree, that is in the future, against those who keep the Sabbath and refuse to keep Sunday. And at the end, he's going to get the religious powers to unite with the political powers of this world to give a death decree against those who don't keep his Sunday. Why would the devil go through all of these methods and make it a top priority to demean and abolish the Sabbath? Simply because the Sabbath reminds us of the Creator and Jesus is his enemy, the one who he was envious of because the Father consulted Jesus, his Son, and did not consult Lucifer. So he had this little bit of, not little, he had this huge jealous fit against Jesus. Now let's talk about life in the Garden of Eden before sin. What was life in the Garden of Eden before sin? In the garden, there was fullness of happiness. So you and I don't understand that because our world is full of not so much happiness, right? Most of the time, right? So in the Garden of Eden, there was no curse, there was no pain, there was no sorrow, no crying, no death, no cherub to bar the entrance to the garden, free access to the tree of life. We could live forever. Face-to-face communion, talking with the Creator Jesus. The Mrs. White in the Faith I Live By, which is a devotional, page 166, this is what she has to say.
The mysteries of the visible universe, the wondrous work of him which is perfect in knowledge, invited man's study, face to face, heart to heart. Communion with his Maker was the high privilege had he remained loyal to God, all his this would have been his forever.
So that was what they had in the garden before sin, right? Now, here you have the first, it is finished. Remember, we are talking about 7, it is finished in the Garden of Eden. By the way, the word finish is used twice in Genesis 1:31 and also Genesis 2:1. So let's go there for a moment and read Genesis 1:31 and then we'll read chapter 2, verse 1. Now let me just make an explanation. Clearly, the first verse of chapter 2 belongs to the conclusion of chapter 1. Now, don't get me wrong. The chapter division is in the wrong place. You'll say, how do you know that? Right? If you read chapter 1, verse 31, and you read chapter 2, verse 1, it is a continuous thought. Now, you will tell me it's a natural flow. But by the way, we are not changing the Bible because when the Bible was written, there were no chapter or verse divisions in the original manuscript. The authors had not put division, right? The chapters and verses were added, the divisions were added for convenience of finding things in the Bible, okay? So let's read Genesis 1:31 and then we'll read Genesis 2, verse 1.
Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the 6th day.
Okay, 2:1.
Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished.
Okay, so the thought is flowing, right? So he made the evening and the morning and the 6th day. And thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them was finished, right? So that is our first finish. But now we have a got a problem in Genesis 2, verse 2. Let's read that and see.
And on the
Genesis,
seventh day, okay, go ahead.
Genesis 2, verse 2. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done.
Okay. Now, even though it's translated ended, it is the identical word finished in the Hebrew. So, in other words, verse 2 says, and on the seventh day, God finished his work which he had done. So, how do we understand that? Can you finish something twice? Because in Genesis 1 at the 6th, he said it is finished. Then on the 7th, he said it is done. Right? He finished on the 6th, he finished on the 7th. Right? Can you finish twice? Well, in this case, you can. Like, let me give you an illustration. I imagine an artist, right? He paints a beautiful scenery of nature, right? The first day, he prepares the wood, right? And the canvas, and he puts staplers so that it is nice and firm. And then he gets to work and he adds some colors in the background. And after he finishes the work on the first day, he steps back and says, oh, the first day, that was very good. I have accomplished it. It's very good. Second day, he paints a blue sky, some clouds, and then he steps back on the second day and he says, that's looking good too, because now it is taking on a life of its own. And then the third day, he paints some trees, some beautiful flowers, some green grass, and he finishes his work on the third day. And like the other 2 days, he looks at it and says, that's very good. For the third day, that is perfect. I had a good painting session on the third day. Then the fourth day, he puts the sun in the sky, and some days we can see the moon in the sky also on a clear day, right? And he puts the moon kind of opaque in the sky. So he puts the sun there and he puts the moon, and after the fourth day, he does the same thing. He steps back and says, oh, that is good. Fifth day, he paints some birds sitting on trees, some birds flying through the air, then some fish jumping out of the water. And then he looks back and that is very good. Now it is becoming very nice. Sixth day, he starts his work. He makes animals. He paints giraffes and elephants and cows and all the different kinds of land animals. And then he creates man and woman. He paints them, and they are standing in the middle of the majestic scene of nature. And he adds the finishing touches. He puts a little bit of idea, like whatever artists do, right? And then he looks and he says, very good, he has finished his piece of art, his masterpiece, right? He gave it a few touches on the canvas, and now it's ready for everybody to see. Now, is he finished? Has he finished his painting? Yes, he has finished his painting. It's a beautiful scenery, and he has finished it. But there's something new. And that's the signature of who painted. Now, all these paintings that sell for millions of dollars have the artist's name there, right? Van Gogh or Rembrandt or whoever, right? And because if he doesn't put his name on it, somebody can come along and claim it as theirs, as though they did it. So the first 6 days of creation week, Jesus painted the world in living color that changes at every instant. And on the seventh day, he signed his work by creating the Sabbath. And so, is it correct to say that he finished it on the 6th day and he finished it on the 7th day? Yes, because on the 7th day, he put his seal or his signature on his work of art so that everybody remembers that he's the one who made the earth and everything in it. So does Satan hate the Sabbath? Because it points to the Creator and what he has done and is doing everything possible. Satan is doing everything possible to get rid of the Sabbath because he doesn't like it, because it reminds us of Jesus. So that is the first. It is finished, and that was at creation. Now we have 6 more to go. Let's go to the 6th one. Second one. Now the second one is, the second it is finished is at the altar of sacrifice, right? So by the sin, the life of man was cast into spiritual disorder, emptiness, darkness, and the prospect of death. It was a spiritual reversal of the literal creation. Then came, what came? The curse came in, pain came in, sorrow came in, crying came in. The cherubim barred the entrance to the garden, barred us from the tree of life, Adam and Eve, and we had no face-to-face communion with the Creator. But then Jesus promised Adam and Eve a restoration through the spotless life and death of Christ. Right? Let's read that passage that points to the altar of sacrifice in the sanctuary.
To Adam, the offering of the first sacrifice at the altar of sacrifice was a most painful ceremony. His hand must be raised to take life, which only God could give. It was the first time he had ever witnessed death, and he knew that had he been obedient to God, there would have been no death of man or beast. As he slew the innocent victim, he trembled at the thought that his sin must shed the blood of the spotless Lamb of God. This scene gave him a deeper and more vivid sense of the greatness of his transgression, which nothing but the death of God's dear Son could expiate. And he marveled at the infinite goodness that would give such a ransom to save the guilty. A star of hope illuminated the dark and terrible future and relieved it of its utter desolation.
Okay, so that was hope that Jesus gave, right? That was the hope that Jesus gave all of us at the altar of sacrifice, right? Now, Jesus came to spiritually fill people's lives with order, because when we sin, we lost that spiritual connection with Him, right? So He came to fill people's lives with order, light, and life, right? And He explained the purpose of His incarnation, that is His first coming. Now notice what Jesus came to do according to John 4:34.
Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work."
So Jesus came to finish His work. On the way to Gethsemane, according to John 17:4, once again we find the word finish. But now Jesus is about to suffer in the Garden of Gethsemane. And now He's going to say that He has finished the work of His Father. Now, what is the work of His Father? The Father's work was for Jesus to give a robe of sinless life and pay the penalty for the sins of the whole world. That was the Father's work for Jesus. So in Gethsemane, Jesus prayed to the Father and told Him that He had finished the work that the Father had sent Jesus to do. Let's read John 17:4.
I have glorified you on the earth. I have finished the work which you have given me to do.
So then on the cross of Calvary, now this is, remember, the altar of sacrifice. We have studied the sanctuary services before. This is the altar of sacrifice, which represents the cross of Jesus. On the 6th day of the week, when did Jesus die? On the 6th day of the week, preparation day, Jesus cried out to His Father. What did He cry out on the cross? It is finished. And what was He saying? He had lived a perfect life. That was the work that Father gave Him. And then He died for sinners. So He bore a perfect life, and then He bore the penalty of us all. Right. Now, John 19:30. Let's read John 19:30.
So when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished." And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit.
Okay, so now this is the second time in the history of this world that we find it is finished, right? To whom was Jesus speaking when He said it is finished? He was speaking to His Father. Now, in fact, the last 3 declarations of Jesus on the cross was Him speaking to His Father, right? Notice this statement from the Desire of Ages, page 834.
When upon the cross he cried out, "It is finished," he addressed the Father. The compact had been fully carried out.
Okay, so there she's explaining the meaning of the word, it is finished. The contact that he had with the Father had been addressed, right? Now, what did Jesus have to do when he came to earth? He had to do two things. First of all, he had to live a perfect, sinless life and weave a robe with which he could cover our nakedness, our sin, right? Next, secondly, he had to bear on himself our sins, all the sins of the world, beginning from Adam till the last person who will be living on this earth. So he had to live a perfect life and he had to bear the burden of sin. Did Jesus do that when he said it is finished on the cross? Had he done that? Yes, he had finished the reason for why he had come to earth, to live the perfect life and suffer death on the cross. So that is why he could say, it is finished. First, he said it is finished when he created the world, and now he is saying it is finished when he has given us what? Let's read 2 Corinthians 5:17. Spiritually speaking, redemption was a reversal of the results of a fall, and it is a new creation. So he created the world, then we fell into sin. Then Jesus is giving us, spiritually speaking, a reversal of the curse of sin. He's giving us hope. And that is when he said it is finished on the cross. Let's read 2 Corinthians 5:7.
Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. All things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new.
So redemption is recreation. After finishing his work of redemption on the 6th day, Jesus rested all day Sabbath in the tomb. So the 7th day, after he finished his work of redemption, he rested. And that was the full day of his creation week. So at the beginning, finished, rest. On the cross, it is finished. On the 7th day, rest. Can you see a pattern here? And now notice Acts 2:25 to 27. Let's read.
For David says concerning him, I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for he is at my right hand, that I may not be shaken. Therefore my heart rejoiced, and my tongue was glad. Moreover, my flesh also will rest in hope, for you will not leave my soul, me in Hades, the grave, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption.
Okay, Mana, what did Jesus say here? He says, my flesh will rest in hope. So did the flesh of Jesus rest in the tomb after he said it is finished? What day is he resting? The 7th day. And what is he resting from? He's resting from the work of redemption, which is a new creation. Now, actually, the New International Version has a better translation. He says, you will not leave me in the grave, which is Hades, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. Because when we die, we begin to decomposition. But Jesus, that didn't happen to Jesus in the tomb, right? So, did Jesus rest by himself at creation? Did Jesus rest by himself alone at creation? Or did he invite Adam and Eve to enter into his rest at creation? He invited them, right? He invited Adam and Eve to come and rest with him on that first Sabbath. They enjoyed the first Sabbath with God. It wasn't their rest, it was his, because he's the one who worked. Now, did Jesus rest alone in the grave? However, Jesus did not rest alone. The women and also the disciples rested as Adam and Eve had done at creation. The disciples of Jesus, they also rested. He had done all the work for redemption and rested from his work that Sabbath. And his followers, they entered into his rest. They did not understand it then why they were resting, but they all rested there. Remember, the women didn't come to embalm him on the Sabbath, they were resting. So they entered into his rest on that day after his crucifixion, when he was resting in the grave. Let's read Luke 23, 54 to 56.
That day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew near. And the women who had come with him from Galilee followed after, and they observed the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils, and they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandments.
So did they rest? Yes. What do you think their rest was like? Was it a joyous one like Adam and Eve had? No, they had a restless rest. Were they happy on that Sabbath? No, they were miserable, sad and crying. Their master was dead. What was that God's plan for them? What would have happened if they had believed and listened to what Jesus said? Many times Jesus said, particularly in the last 6 months of his work, he said, I must go to Jerusalem. I'm going to be mistreated by the religious leaders. I'm going to be killed, but I'm going to be resurrected on the third day. What would their rest have been if they understood that? They would have said, the master is resting in the tomb from his work of redemption. He has lived a perfect life. He has borne the load of sin, and we are now saved. They would have been singing, hallelujah, we are saved. And tomorrow we are going to see it because he's going to rise again. Is that the way God wanted them to enjoy that rest that day? Of course. Later on, they would understand it was not God's plan that they should be sad. It was God's plan that they be joyful on Sabbath day because Jesus had won a new creation, as we read in 2 Corinthians 5, verse 7. We are new creatures, right? Now, let's go to the third, it is finished. The third, it is finished, it's also in the court at the cross. The cross represented by the altar of the court, right? It's in the court. When Jesus died on the cross, not only did he say it is finished, but God the Father echoed it is finished in heaven when Jesus died on the cross. How do we know that? Let's read Youth Instructor, June 21, 1900, and see what Spirit of Prophecy has to tell us.
God bowed his head satisfied. Now justice and mercy could blend. Now he could be just and yet the justifier of all who should believe on Christ. He, God, looked upon the victim expiring on the cross and said, it is finished. The human race shall have another trial. The redemption price was paid and Satan fell like lightning from heaven.
So God says it is finished. The plan of salvation has been accomplished. Jesus has lived the perfect life and he has borne the sin, right? Now Luke 10:18. So when it says Satan was cast out of heaven at the cross, he was, because remember after that time, the Satan represented this world as its usurped Adam's place. Adam should have been the one who represented, but then he was the one who was representing it. And as the representative of this world, he fell from heaven. He no longer can go to heaven to represent us. Jesus is the one who represents us. He is our mediator. And then he was cast out of the sympathy of the heavenly being, right? Mrs. White wrote in The Desire of Ages that after the heavenly beings saw the way Satan treated Jesus in his trial and his crucifixion, any inkling, even a bit of sympathy that they had with Satan was gone. Gone. He was cast out of their sympathy as well as the representative of this world. He was no longer a representative. Jesus is our representative who represents the world because he finished the work of redemption at the cross. So that is the third, finished, right? The third, it is finished. Now let's go to the fourth, it is finished. Now this takes place in the holy place. Now all this time we were at the altar, right? Now we are moving to the holy place, right? What happens in the holy place? See, we are moving through the sanctuary. We have studied the sanctuary, right? So we can see we are moving through the sanctuary. The fourth, it is finished, occurred, took place when Jesus ascended to the holy place of the heavenly sanctuary and presented himself before the Father as the slain lamb at his ascension. How do we know this? Let's read Revelation 5, verses 11 and 12.
Then I looked and heard the voice of many angels around the throne, the living creatures and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000 and 10,000s of thousands, saying with a loud voice, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing."
Picture in your mind, if you can, Jesus arrives in heaven at his ascension. The whole angels have come with him and they are singing as they take him up a glorious song. There are angels in heaven asking questions, these angels answering, and Mrs. White describes the arrival of Jesus at the heavenly throne room and his encounter with the Father. That is found in Desire of Ages. Let's read that. That quote, "It is finished," from the Desire of Ages. I put it up there. It's found pages 833 and 830.
Then the portals of the city of God are opened wide, and the angelic throng sweep through the gates amid a burst of rapturous music. There is the throne, and around it the rainbow of promise. There are cherubim and seraphim, the commanders of the angel hosts, the sons of God, the representatives of the unfallen worlds, are as assembled. The heavenly council before which Lucifer had accused God and his son, the representatives of those sinless realms over which Satan had thought to establish his dominion. All are there to welcome the Redeemer. They are eager to celebrate his triumph and to glorify their King. But he waves them back. Not yet. He cannot now receive the coronet of glory and the royal robe. He enters into the presence of his Father. He points to his wounded head, the pierced side, the marred feet. He lifts his hands, bearing the print of nails. He points to the tokens of his triumph. He presents to God the wave sheaf, those raised with him as representatives of that great multitude who shall come forth from the grave at his second coming. He approaches the Father, with whom there is joy over one sinner that repents, who rejoices over one with singing. Before the foundations of the earth were laid, the Father and the Son had united in a covenant to redeem man if he should be overcome by Satan. They had clasped their hands in a solemn pledge that Christ should become the surety for the human race. This pledge Christ has fulfilled. When upon the cross he cried, "It is finished," he addressed the Father. The compact had been fully carried out. Now he declares, "Father, it is finished. I have done thy will. O my God, I have completed the work of redemption. If thy justice is satisfied, I will that they also, whom thou hast given me, be with me where I am."
Now listen to this. The fourth, "it is finished," is in the holy place, and the holy place is in heaven, right? The court was earth, the holy place and most holy place are in the heavenly sanctuary. And this pledge Jesus has fulfilled. When on the cross he cried out, "It is finished," he addressed the Father. The compact had been fully carried out. Now he declares, and this is in the holy place, he's speaking once again to the Father. He says, "Father, it is finished. I have done your will, O my God. I have completed the work of redemption." So what is the fourth? It is finished. Basically, Jesus says, I have finished winning the provision for salvation. So now I can intercede for my own because I have a perfect life to impute or give to them. and I have a payment for sin that I have made. So now they can come to me as their intercessor and claim the benefits that I earned when I was on earth. So it was finished. He paid the price. Now he's gone to heaven so that you and I, when we confess our sins and repent and go there, he can give us the benefits of his sacrifice that he had on the cross. Right? So now we were not, the provision was made on the cross, but you and I have to go individually to receive it and be saved. So we go by faith to the holy place. Now, then what happens is Jesus then began to apply the benefits of his life and death to those who rest in his finished work. According to the book of Hebrew, the Sabbath is a sign of this experience, right? Those who enter his rest cease from our own works to focus on his work. We enter Christ's redemption rest, just as Adam and Eve entered God's creation rest. We must rest in his doing and dying, not ours. So when we rest on the Sabbath, when we rest in the assurance of redemption, then Jesus is able to give us the benefits. Let's read Hebrews 4, 9 and 10.
There remains, therefore, a rest for the people of God. For he who has entered his rest has himself also ceased from his work as God did from his.
Now, who did all the work of redemption? Did we do anything? No. Jesus did it all. He paid it all. So in redemption, we rest in what he has done, not in what we have done, not by our works. It says we have ceased from our works as he ceased from his work at creation. Now, Mrs. White wrote this in manuscript releases 111, 1897. Let's read that.
When he uttered the cry, "It is finished," Christ knew that the battle was won. As a moral conqueror, he planted his banner on the eternal heights. Was there not a joy among the angels, not a son, not a daughter of Adam, but could now lay hold on the merits of the spotless Son of God and say, "Christ has died for me. He is my Savior."
Okay, praise the Lord. Now, by the way, it was during this period when Jesus was in the holy place that the little horn attempted to change the Sabbath. We have studied that, remember? Right? So notice the sanctuary and the Sabbath are evoked, right? Most of the work that the little horn did during that 1,260 years was to mess around with Christ's intercessory work in the holy place, right? During this period, the little horn sought to change the Sabbath from the seventh day to Sunday, a commandment that is in the most holy place, in the heavenly sanctuary in the ark. And the last three, "it is finished," will take place in the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary. So now we are moving from the holy place of the sanctuary into the most holy place for the fifth, "it is finished." Okay, now we are in the fifth, "it is finished." The focus here is on the most holy place. And like I said, we have moved from the altar, the holy place, and now we are in the most holy place. And then, of course, we are going to move back again into the camp when the new earth is created, right? Like I said, the little horn during the 1,260 years did its utmost to abolish the seventh-day Sabbath. This set the stage for the final great conflict. Now, Daniel 7:25 says, "He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, shall intend to change times and laws. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for times, and half a times," referring to that, right? So now let me ask you, at the end of time, are God's people going to denounce that change where he's trying to change the Sabbath? Are they going to denounce the mark of the beast? God's people will proclaim the three angels' messages, attempting to bring the world back to the worship of the Creator on his holy day. This message, where does it come from? It comes from the most holy place, because where is the other 10 commandments, the law and the Sabbath? The Sabbath is in the law. They are found in the Ark of the Covenant. Let's read Revelation 14. verses 6 and 7.
Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and springs of water.
Now, at the end of time, this message is going to polarize the world into two groups, right? The loud cry of Revelation 18, which is an intensification of this message given as a loud, megaphone. And the Sabbath Sunday issue at the end will polarize the world into two camps. God's faithful children will receive the seal of God, that is, are keeping the 7-day Sabbath, and Satan's followers will receive the mark of the beast, right? Now, when the entire world has taken sides, God's voice will be heard coming from the most holy place of the sanctuary, saying, It is finished. The sanctuary service has closed. No one can enter the temple again until after the seven plagues are poured out and the mystery of God is finished. Now, the mystery of God is the plan of the gospel message. So, at the end, God is going to say, when judgment finishes, the judgment of the living finishes, God is going to say, it is finished. No longer will mediation take place. That is the fifth, it is finished. Okay? Sanctuary services closed, right? It's referring to the close of probation. When probation closed, everyone has made decisions for eternity. Nobody will be able to enter the most holy place because there is no longer an intercessor for sin. Now notice Revelation 10 verse 7.
But in the days of the sounding of the seventh angel, when he is about to sound, the mystery of God would be finished, as he declared to his servants, the prophets.
Now, once again, the mystery of God is preaching of the gospel, salvation. Now, after probation closes, there's no point in preaching of the gospel because people have made their decisions for eternity. Okay? So, what's going to be heard from the temple in the most holy place when probation closes? It is finished. The most holy place ministry has come to an end. Now, Testimony to the Church, Volume 6, 478. This is what Mrs. White said.
Until in heaven is spoken the word, it is finished, there will always be places for labor and hearts to receive the message.
Okay, so until that word, it is finished, the gospel can go. Now, notice how she comments on this, it is finished. This is found in early writings, page 279.
I saw angels hurrying to and fro in heaven. An angel with a writer's inkhorn by his side returned from the earth and reported to Jesus that his work was done and the saints were numbered and sealed. Then I saw Jesus, who had been ministering before the ark containing the 10 commandments, throw down the censer. He raised his hands and with a loud voice said, It is done. And all the angelic host laid off their crowns as Jesus made the solemn declaration, He that is just, let him be he that is unjust, let him be unjust still. And he which is filthy, let him be filthy still. And he that is righteous, let him be righteous still. And he that is holy, let him be holy still.
Okay, so when Jesus says it is done, at that time, that's the close of probation. Now, Mrs. White, again in early writings, referred to the close of probation in page 281 of early writing.
All heaven had united with Jesus as they heard the fearful words, It is done, it is finished. The plan of salvation had been accomplished, but few had chosen to accept it.
Okay. Now, if you notice, she uses the synonymously finished with done. So finished and it is done. synonymous, right? Then Jesus will leave, when he says it is done, will leave the most holy place, and a terrible time of trouble will ensue for those of us living on earth. During this time, there will be no intercessor. A death decree will be legislated against those who keep the Sabbath, and it will appear like God's people will be wiped out of the face of the earth because they keep the Sabbath. Now, we won't have an intercessor because the sanctuary services are closed. But Jesus said, I will be with you always till the end of the world. So Jesus will be with us, but we won't have an intercessor, right? Remember that. And now notice that this it is finished is related to the Sabbath as well. Can you see how closely the Sabbath is related to every plan, creation, redemption, the close of salvation, right? The verb. And this leads us to the sixth, it is finished, right? That also comes from the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary, right? At the hour of utmost extremity for God's people, those of us living here on earth, the death decree has been legislated and it's about to be executed. Then a voice is heard from the most holy place. And what does that voice say? It is done. Let's read Revelation 16:17.
Then the seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, It is done.
So the seventh plague, the last plague that marks the coming of Jesus, God from the throne, his throne says, it is done. The persecution of my people is over. And that is when Jesus stands up to come and deliver his people, right? That's the moment when God's people will be delivered from their enemies. Their trials are over. They will be taken with Jesus to heaven. Now, what does Mrs. White say in the Great Controversy 635 and 636? She describes this climatic moment, so you and I can get a picture of it, and that you and I will be able to be ready. Let's read that and see.
When the protection of human laws shall be withdrawn from those who honor the law of God, there will be in different lands a simultaneous movement for their destruction. As the time appointed in the decree draws near, the people will conspire to root out the hated sect. It will be determined to strike on one night a decisive blow, which shall utterly silence the voice of dissent and reproof. The people of God, some in prison cells, some hidden in solitary retreats in the forest and the mountains, still plead for divine protection, while in every quarter companies of armed men, urged on by host of evil angels, are preparing for the work of death. It is now in the hour of utmost extremity that the God of Israel will interpose for the deliverance of his chosen. It is at midnight that God manifests his power for the deliverance of his people. The sun appears shining in its strength. Signs and wonders follow in quick succession. The wicked look with terror and amazement upon the scene, while the righteous behold with solemn joy the tokens of their deliverance. Everything in nature seems turned out of its course. The streams cease to flow, dark, heavy clouds come up and clash against each other. In the midst of the angry heavens is one clear space of indescribable glory. Whence comes the voice of God like the sound of many waters saying, It is done.
Wow. So all of these, it is done, clear in your minds. Do all of these, it is done, have to do with the Sabbath? Why do the wicked want to destroy God's people? Because they are observing the Sabbath. But God is going to say the persecution is finished. It is done. And Jesus comes to deliver his people. Now the final and the seventh, it is finished, is when Eden is restored. Jesus will now create a new heaven and a new earth, His people will once again inhabit that Eden home. God's people will return to where it all started, and there will be a new creation, and the voice of God will be heard saying, "It is done." This "it is done" also involves the Sabbath. Let's read Revelation 21, verses 3 and then verse 7.
And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, no sorrow, no crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. Then he who sat on the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said to me, It is done. Several versions translate, It is finished. I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give of the fountain of the water of life freely to him who thirsts. He who overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son.
Tell me, is this a restoration of what existed at the beginning before sin came in? Absolutely. And when Jesus says, Behold, I make all things new, in other words, he's saying, I'm going to create again as I did at the beginning. I have restored everything to the way that it was at the beginning. And what a day that we are going to keep to come. And what day are we going to keep to commemorate the fact that everything has been restored as it was at the beginning? Isaiah 66, verses 22 and 23 tell us, we read this last week also, God's people will worship, then enter his rest on the seventh day after creation of the new heaven and the new earth, as mentioned as a memorial of Christ's work and rest. Right? Now let's read to finish a statement from Mrs. White. Notice how she connects creation, redemption, recreation, and the Sabbath. The human race will have done full circle from Eden to Eden, and now we will keep the original Sabbath before the fall. Let's read Mrs. White.
At creation, in the beginning, the Father and the Son had rested upon the Sabbath after their work of creation. When the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them, the Creator and all heavenly beings rejoiced in contemplation of the glorious scene. The morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Now, in Joseph's tomb, Jesus rested upon the work of redemption, and though there was grief among those who loved him on earth, yet there was joy in heaven. Glorious to the eyes of heavenly beings was the promise of the future result of his redemptive work, a restored creation, a redeemed race that having conquered sin could never fall. This result to throw from to result to flow from God's completed work at the cross. God and the angels saw, with his seen the day upon which Jesus rested is forever linked, for his work is perfect, and whatsoever God doth, it shall be forever. When there shall be a restitution of all things, which God had spoken by the mouth of all his holy prophets since the world began, the creation Sabbath, the day on which Jesus lay at rest in Joseph's tomb, will still be a day of rest and rejoicing. Heaven and earth will unite in praise as from the Sabbath to another. The nations of the saved shall bow in joyful worship to God and the Lamb.
I hope you noticed how she links creation, redemption, and new creation. And what is the sign of all three? The Sabbath. So can you understand how important the 7-day Sabbath is? God's plan has never changed. Each it is finished has to do with the Sabbath. And praise the Lord that after God creates a new heaven and a new earth, after Jesus creates a new heaven and a new earth, God's people will enjoy rest with their Creator, with our Creator. Resting as Adam and Eve did on that first Sabbath in the Garden of Eden. Even though we did not work to create, we did not work to redeem, we did not work to recreate, we will keep Sabbath in what He has done, not in what we have done. That's the reason why the Sabbath is a sign of righteousness by faith and not righteousness by work, because it is all about Jesus and not about us. Now, how many it is finishers were left? Well, we actually have 3 finishers left. One was we have it is finished at the close of probation. We have it is finished at the 7th plague when God's people are delivered. And we have the last, it is finished when Jesus makes the new heaven and a new earth, and we will be able to dwell with Him throughout the ceaseless ages of eternity. Has God's plan for the Sabbath ever changed? It has never changed. To insert Sunday here is an intrusion. It doesn't fit. It's like sticking a square peg in a round hole. It doesn't fit. The plan of God from creation is the Sabbath, redemption is the Sabbath, and the final restoration is the Sabbath. God not only gives us things, He gives us of His time, and relationships are based on time. So let everyone know what a blessing the Sabbath is.